Hello. Well, that was thrilling. So thank you for bearing with me these past few minutes. I haven't done a live stream in quite some time, and I couldn't figure out where the button was to start the production. But fortunately, the cooler minds have prevailed, and here we are. Thank you for taking time out of your day, wherever you are in the world, to join me for this stream. For my own self, as you can see, I'm not in my usual environment. I'm in Tokyo, Japan, and I've already started writing the next book, but we won't be focusing on that today. Today we'll be focusing on Starry Night. So Starry Night came out about 2 weeks ago, and I think right now it's the #1 book in new releases in contemporary fiction on Amazon, which is pretty cool. It is a novella, which means that it's fairly short. It comes in at just a little over 100 pages, and it can be read in a single sitting. That was by design. Some of my favorite books are novellas. For example, Animal Farm, I think, is one of the most perfect books ever written. I also love Anthem by Ayn Rand. Longer isn't always better in the case of literature. I hope that by now, after 2 weeks, some of you will have had the chance to have read it, either in the ebook format, the paperback version, or the audiobook. I'm particularly proud about the ebook because apparently, with a little ingenuity, we were able to solve a problem that I think, according to the internet, has plagued many other authors in translating written works into the ebook format. I think it looks like no other ebook that has ever been created before, which I think is actually very exciting, specifically with respect to the Vincent chapter, which is somewhat experimental in its presentation. Rick says, probably not reading that. Bro, why are you here, man? So the thing about this is, look, I'm going to be writing nonfiction again. I've already started. I'm going to write about gender dynamics and relationships and all that good stuff that's very popular on the channel. But despite the fact that that is the most popular content by far that I put out, I refuse to exclusively talk about that stuff. And that is, on some level, not in my direct financial best interest. Like, certainly it would be better for the channel and the numbers to just pump out banger after banger with respect to what the market is telling me it demands. My resistance to that idea is a couple points. One is, I think that when content creators just stay on their hobby horse and say the same things over and over again, people can love them, people can binge them, and then once they realize they're starting to repeat themselves, they lose interest. Think about how many people you're subscribed to on YouTube right now. Like, you're a subscriber, but you haven't actually listened to one of their episodes in months, if not years. Like, that subscription might have been like a legacy thing that you executed when you first got enthusiastic about the channel. One of the rules of thumb I gave for myself when I started PsycHacks was I was never going to say the same thing twice, which is why typically, if I do have to make a point that I've said before, I just refer folks to a previous episode with a card and don't reiterate the same thing over and over again. This is sometimes to a detriment because some of the old content is actually really good. And generally, when people come to the channel, and I think most of the people have come to the channel in the last year or so, they don't go back into the archives and watch the old stuff. So a lot of questions that people have actually already been answered years ago. But I don't want to just reiterate things that I've previously said. That's also a form of respect for my audience, because I don't know about you, but I hate being said the same thing over and over again. It makes me feel like I'm being treated like a dumb dog. So out of respect for the audience, I try to keep things novel. The second thing about that is, I think it's really important to not simply focus on one thing. Um, Women and relationships are really important. They make life much better if you can figure them out, but they're not the whole story. And I do think that there is a tendency in content creation today to become more and more one-dimensional. You can see this in like looks maxing. You can see this in folks who get really into pickup and game. Like it becomes their entire life. It becomes their entire personality. And I don't think that that is the point. I think you sacrifice too much of yourself to make the entirety of your existence focused on a single goal. One of my favorite models for masculinity that has existed historically is the samurai. And the samurai is great because it finds a way to combine the best attributes of the masculine while still preserving the essence of the feminine. Like no one is ever going to say that a samurai is not masculine. He's a badass. He walks around and basically just makes his living off of his sword, if he's a Ronin, and has the highest principles of duty and honor. But a samurai is also someone who, like before a duel, can sit down and write a haiku. Like that's the presence of mind that he has. You can think about the masculine and feminine in energetic terms as well. Like men and women both have masculine and feminine energies. And one of the purposes of masculine energy, whether it's in a man or a woman, is to defend the feminine. Like the masculine is strength and the feminine is weakness on some level. It's a weakness that is potentially more sensitive, like our skin, because it's kind of weak, because it can be impinged upon, like it's not hard like rock, we can feel. Like you need a little bit of weakness in order to have sensitivity. But in some very macho forms of masculinity, the feminine is completely dispensed with, and the man just becomes a rock through and through. And I think that is a form of death before that guy has been buried. Like, I think that part of being a strong man and developing those masculine traits is to be able to protect and guard the sensitivity to beauty, the sensitivity to truth, the sensitivity to the bittersweet evanescence of life that can be the highest manifestation of the feminine. So I don't think that this book, though very, very different from Value of Others, is really unexpected from me. Like this is something that I have done for quite some time. So let me talk a little bit about the story of The Value of Others. And then also, you guys can interrupt me at any time. Typically with Super Chats is the best way to get my attention. If you have a question or a comment, go ahead and do that, and I will respond to that as they present themselves. It's hard for me to look at the running chat and speak to the camera at the same time. So the Super Chats really pop out, so I know to pay attention. Okay, so Starry Night is about the final weeks of painter Vincent van Gogh. I was very much obsessed, I think is the right word, with Vincent van Gogh when I was a young man. Back then, I was also a struggling artist. I was an actor, not a visual artist. But I saw reflected in his story some of my own struggles. I was particularly taken with the historical fact that Vincent van Gogh eventually decided to shoot himself. He tried to shoot himself in the heart one day, but he missed. Like the bullet went into him and ricocheted off of a rib and like lodged it into his stomach. So he ended up dying by suicide, but it took him like 2 days to die. And he had the wherewithal to pick himself back up because he shot himself in a pasture outside of town, and to walk back to the inn where he was staying, where he was conscious and sane for the next 48 hours. His friend and doctor, Paul Gachet, showed up. His brother, Theo, was able to come from Paris. And he said some pretty heavy stuff. I thought this was interesting because I wanted to know what might happen between the time someone makes a decision to take his own life and when he actually dies, which in most successful suicide attempts is almost instantaneous. There's no time for regret. There's no time for personal transformation. There's no time to second guess that decision. I think this is especially interesting because according to the research, for example, most people who have survived, let's say, jumping off of a bridge, and we know this because the most popular place in the world to commit suicide is the Golden Gate Bridge right outside where I live. And according to the research, when the researchers have tracked down survivors of that attempt, I think like unanimously, not even most, like unanimously, the folks regretted their decision. Like as soon as they cleared the railing and gravity kicked in and they realized that they had just made an irreversibly fatal and permanent decision, they woke up. Like whatever fog of depression they were existing under was completely cleared by the onrush of gravity. And it's almost like as they were falling, they could see that whatever they had been monomaniacally focused on and how their worldview had gotten narrower and narrower, and they only saw this one way out, was actually total bullshit. But it took direct confrontation with death to dispel those illusions. That's how powerful these illusions can be in the grip of some people. And so I thought, well, here you have a guy who's falling for 2 days, not just for a few seconds. And what might have happened in those 2 days between when he jumped and when he hit the water. I also struggled with depression a great deal when I was younger, and even came close to killing myself on a couple of different occasions when I was a young man. One of which I spoke recently about on my most recent appearance on Soft White Underbelly. So if you're interested in hearing that story, you can check that out. And I do think that this is a serious problem. I mean, we know that there is an epidemic of deaths of despair in today's society. Deaths of despair are deaths due to addictions, severe emotional neglect, and suicide. And they disproportionately affect men as well, which I think is interesting. And I'd like to know like why that is. And if you look at Van Gogh's life, I think there's a lot of factors that compound to make this outcome much more likely. It's still tragic, but it's not something that we can't potentially understand. This is another reason for writing the book, because fundamentally I'm a psychologist, I'm a therapist. And I've worked with hundreds and hundreds of depressives, including, fortunately, no one who's actually ended up killing themselves, but people who have come close, and also those who have survived the suicide of others. They were the children of fathers who killed themselves, or the parents of children who killed themselves, which is a terrible, tragic thing. And one of the main goals of the book is to help people understand, like emotionally, experientially, how someone can get to this point. Because if you're not depressed, if you've never thought of killing yourself, seriously, it can seem like completely bizarre, absurd, and insane to make this decision. But within the kind of reasoning of the depressive, it almost makes a perfect logical sense. I think it's also important to consider that this decision affects people in radically different ways. Like the person who decides to kill himself, obviously that affects him much differently than his caregiver or loved one. This is also something that I learned when working at the cancer support community for a couple of years. As I was completing my doctorate, I was working with cancer patients, people who were diagnosed with terminal illnesses, and their caregivers on a daily basis. And typically it was when I do the sessions with the cancer patients, it was actually a joy. These folks, I mean, after being diagnosed with a terminal illness is like a roller coaster, but there are some predictable stages to it. Often there is denial to begin with, shock, terror, anger, depression. But most of the time, people go through those stages fairly quickly and reach acceptance when they realize that, wow, if it's true that I only have 6 months left to live, do I really want to spend those 6 months terrified or depressed or railing against fate? So they get to acceptance pretty quickly, and they start living their lives in really authentic and powerful ways. Like, the sessions with the cancer patients were always full of life. And we talked about this a lot. It was like only when they started to die did they really start to live as fully as possible. And that's a lesson to take from these folks. It's like, we don't have to wait until we have cancer in order to start living very, very fully. But on some level, it can feel like it's safer to live fully once we know that we're going to die. Because what's the worst that could happen? You know what I'm saying? If me living in authentically means that I make a big mistake, well, I won't really be around very long to have to deal with the consequences of that. But working with cancer patients helped me to realize that the closer we are to death, paradoxically, the closer we are to life. And that's something that I really hoped to communicate in the Vincent chapter in particular, which is after he's put the bullet inside of him, it's almost like a, what do they call it? Like the passion of a saint. Like in the process of dying, he becomes more lively than he has ever been. On the other hand, when I would work with the caregivers, the husbands and wives of these patients, that was like going to a, what do they call it? A funeral for people who haven't even died yet. These were people who were so stressed out, who were so burnt out, who also were getting very little support because everyone was focused on the person who was dying. And many of these caregivers were even invalidating their own feelings. Like, why do I have the right to complain? It's not like I'm going through chemo. It's not like I'm going to be dead in 3 months. I'm going to be fine. And this is another paradox, which is we could say that these caregivers, many of them were actually very loving in my definition of the word, in that they were sacrificing for the good of the other. Like, they were certainly putting their own happiness and well-being and prosperity and self-interest to the side in order to care for this other human being, and it was destroying them. Like, nobody was happy to the extent that they were loving in this way. Like, maybe there was a bittersweet satisfaction to what they were doing, but none of them were thriving. And I think that's a truth about love, is that we as human beings have a capacity to love, but maybe not for very long. Like, I think it's somewhat instructive that Jesus Christ, which in the mythology of Christianity is God himself, came down to earth and then basically worked from 30 to 33. He was kind of MIA until then. And then, so he loved humanity for about 3 years. And in that time, everything was basically sacrificed for the good of humanity. There was nothing left. Like, it's very difficult, if not impossible, to love indefinitely. And I do think that on some level, once you love in that way, you get kind of a Purple Heart. You get a little medal. You've done your service, you've learned your lesson, you've been honorably discharged, and you can reasonably be expected not to do that again. You know, it's like, it's very common, especially for widows and widowers of those who died over extended debilitating illnesses, to not marry again. Often, once the inevitable happens, and people go into a flight of life, and they just want to have fun. They just want to experience warmth and goodness and frivolity. They want to keep things kind of superficial because they've been so deep and heavy for so long. And I don't think anyone can really chide them for that, because they've like done their duties and now they're on leave. So again, I was suicidal, I was depressed, and I was fascinated with Vincent's story. The first manifestation of this book actually came out when I was 19 years old, which was 24 years ago. We're at the experimental theater wing at the Tisch School of Arts at New York University. For my kind of like capstone project, I wrote a one-act play that took place in those 48 hours between when Vincent shot himself and when he actually died. And it was a conversation between him and his doctor, Gachet. This has come up for some people, but like every character in this book is a real person. Even the girls. So there are three main chapters: Theo, Vincent's brother, the doctor, Paul Gachet, Vincent himself, and two little interludes that have to do with, that tell the story from girls' perspectives. One of them is the doctor's daughter, Marguerite, and the other is a little girl who lived with the innkeepers where Vincent was staying at the end of his life, named Adeline. So this is, as far as I know, I've only made 2 adjustments from the historical record. So this is actually very true to what happened, which might be interesting for many people. So I wrote this one-act play, and I've been fascinated by this story. I've been wanting to turn it into something larger than itself for decades. And in fact, I've sat down to write that book a couple of times. Once I tried it in my 20s, and it wasn't coming out right. Once I tried it again in my 30s, shortly after graduating with my doctorate, and it wasn't coming out right. And I think it was only after I successfully wrote The Value of Others that I felt, I think I now have the writing experience, and I think I now have the emotional maturity and the life experience to write this book, which was in many respects a much more difficult book to write than The Value of Others. The Value of Others is 423 pages, and it poured out of me. I wrote the whole thing in like less than 7 months while I was working 3 other jobs. Like all I had to do was sit at the screen and the words just flew out, because this was based on things that I knew like the back of my hand. Starry Night is about a quarter of the length, and it took me about as long to write. So it was 4 times more difficult to write than The Value of Others. The Value of Others and nonfiction in general, I find to be very easy to write because there is a logic to the argument. I have an idea and I'm building on that idea. And so each sentence kind of follows each other in a reasonable progression. It's like there is a trail that I can see ahead of me that I'm walking. Fiction, on the other hand, is like crossing a snow-covered plain. Like there are no trails, there are no footprints, and you can literally move in any direction. And in many respects, what makes fiction approach literature is not the theme, like what is being said, but how it's being said. Many great works of art, many great literary works, not a lot happens in those books. Like To the Lighthouse by Virginia Woolf, not a lot happens in that book. Ulysses by James Joyce, it's just an average day in the life of Leopold Bloom. Like there are no big tragic events. There is no apotheosis. There is no heavy drama. I think what makes a lot of these, especially modern literary works, engaging for folks is that it's how the writer decides to describe reality and the character's experiences. And that's what I was trying to do for Starry Night. On some level, there is kind of a heavy dramatic theme. It's a guy who's decided to kill himself. But I think in the process of that, it's showing how that experience like unfolds is more important than just the fact that he died. As a therapist, I wanted, as I was saying, to talk about this crisis of suicide and deaths of despair. However, I wanted to do so, one, in a way that wasn't just a nonfiction clinical treatise on why men kill themselves. I didn't think that would be very fun to read. And if I just wrote a literary work about a random guy, I don't know if people would care. So I do think that uh, using Van Gogh as a foil for the modern masculine experience in general might get people more engaged in the work. Let's see, I got a super chat here. The Value of Others was a turning point, deep healing, deep truth, and real understanding of the masculine feminine. I highly recommend it. Well, thank you, El Draco 188. I appreciate that. The book is still selling very well. The Value of Others. It's kind of settled into a kind of a perennial bestseller status. I'm very happy to report. Like, it gets pretty consistent sales from one month to the next. Now, a year and a half out from its publication. And I think that has a lot to do with the word of mouth referrals for that book. Like, The Value of Others, quick detour, likely would have been on the New York Times bestseller list in 2025, maybe even in 2024, if the New York Times included self-published books, which it doesn't. There's reasons for that, which I won't get into, but it sold very, very well, which is pretty incredible given the fact that I haven't spent a single dollar on marketing. There is no advertising budget. I don't have a publicist. I don't have a team doing viral campaigns. There's no publishing house that's sending me on book tours. It's all due to you guys. It's all due to word of mouth. People who say to other people, hey, have you heard of this guy? Hey, have you read this book? That's how the word gets spread. And I'm really hoping that the same can be true for Starry Night. I do think that for Starry Night to be as successful, it needs to find an audience beyond the strict folks who tend to listen to my YouTube channel every week, because it is so different. That said, I do hope and expect that my audience will expand themselves and give it a shot. And I've also made the prices as low as possible to kind of promote the idea that you can give it a chance. Like, I think the ebook is $10. The audiobook is less than $7. Like, it's less than the price of caramel frappe macchiato at Starbucks. So I hope that I've reduced a lot of the barriers to at least giving it a chance. And if you do like it, I really hope that you will write a review. Those reviews inform the algorithm that will promote this to people who might be interested in this piece of work. Let's see, what else have I got? I think there was something else that came up. Doctor, I'm a huge fan. Your work is a blessing. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Much respect and love supporting your journey, Orion. Fiona from New Zealand. Hello, Fiona. Thank you for your support. If anyone has any questions about the book or would like to share, I appreciate that as well. Yeah, so what else can I say about the creation? Another interesting thing I think about this book is that every single chapter is written in a different literary style. So everything from third-person omniscient to first-person stream of consciousness to an epistolary novel to a diary entry. The idea here, again, was to show how different people can be, to enter into their character, not just in the words that they said and in the descriptions applied to them, but in the very fabric of the writing itself, which was an interesting challenge. The Frantic Teacher 2507, Theo's point of view was fantastic. I feel like his love towards Vincent was the purest there is. Love towards the undeserved. Thanks, man. Yeah, Theo is a really interesting person. Theo was Vincent's younger brother by 4 years, but Theo was functionally Vincent's caregiver for most of his adult life. I think this is especially because Vincent had a falling out with his parents when he was a young man. And I think his father was a type of minister who didn't really agree with Vincent's life choices. And there's some suggestion that he may have disowned Vincent at some point, and Theo, out of his compassion, decided to financially support his brother, who was an unsuccessful artist. Vincent van Gogh's paintings now sell for $80 to $100 million each. I think in his lifetime, he only sold a single painting for about 200 francs. He painted for about 10 years. And his brother, Theo, was an art dealer. So Theo was connected to the art world in Paris and tried for a decade, unsuccessfully, to promote his brother's work to the tastemakers and the elite of that city. Theo was very much Vincent's biggest supporter. He believed in him implicitly. He had a son, Theo had a son, and named him Vincent. What many people don't know, which is alluded to in the book, is that Theo died 6 months after Vincent killed himself. Like, on some level, that's how entwined their hearts and their destinies were, that once Vincent left, there wasn't much reason for Theo to stay on some level. He died of syphilis, which is not a very pretty way to go. The advanced syphilis virus kind of eats away at your brain and creates all kinds of weird dyskinesias and paralyses and psychoses, and not a pleasant way to die. The reason, in fact, why we know about Vincent today is really because of Theo's widow, who also worked with Theo in the art world. And this woman took up the torch and continued to work as hard as she could to promote Vincent's work to the French public. On some level, Vincent became more saleable because he killed himself. He was now the tortured romantic artist who was unappreciated in his time, which forced the public to look more deeply at his work. It almost gave his paintings a form of sincerity and authenticity that they didn't have before. And unfortunately, this is a reality in a lot of art. There's examples of it even in literature. For example, the book A Confederacy of Dunces by O'Toole, I think was rejected by like 70 different publishers. And then the author, out of desperation, killed himself. And once that story got out, houses were willing to give the manuscript another chance. It was eventually posthumously published. And I think it won the Pulitzer Prize for fiction the year after he killed himself. So for better or for worse, there is this trope that for an artist to be legitimate, to have something profound and real to speak about, he needs to be kind of tortured, and he needs to be unsuccessful. There might be some truth to that. Part of, I think, what made Vincent's paintings so incredible was that he was living on the edge of existence, basically. Like he was broke. He spent most of the final years of his life in mental institutions. He died in an artist's garret in kind of a flop house in the countryside. He never had a girlfriend. In fact, he mostly terrorized women. A lot of people know that Vincent cut off a part of his ear. The story about that involves a woman. I can tell that really quickly. By all accounts, the reason why Vincent cut off part of his left ear was because he was really angry with fellow artist Paul Gauguin, who he lived with for a short period of time, like 3 weeks. I think that was all that they could like stand to be with one another. Paul and Vincent had a great deal of respect for each other's art, but Vincent was just too tempestuous for Paul. And I think they got into an argument over like the purpose of art, something very abstract and intellectual. And Vincent, in his rage at Paul's inability to see his point, caused him to lash out at himself and cut off a part of his ear. He was probably in a psychotic state already when he made this decision. That's probably part of the reason why Paul had to distance himself from Vincent, because I don't know if you've ever been around somebody who's actively psychotic, but it can be very terrifying. Though they typically don't hurt other people. It's very rare for somebody who's floridly schizophrenic to actually harm another person. But in this case, they harm themselves, right? So Vincent had cut off a part of his ear and he's bleeding and he doesn't really know what to do with it himself. And so he decides to go to the red light district in Paris and to visit a prostitute that he had seen on occasion in the past and who he may have fallen in love with. By all accounts, Vincent fell in love pretty easily. I think it's because he didn't have a lot of experience or even contact with women. And so this was a woman who was paid to sleep with him, paid to be kind to him. And that might have been the first time a woman had ever with her. So he went to the red light district and made a gift of this ear to this woman, which was not well received, turns out. She didn't quite appreciate the intention behind the gift, though I find it difficult to see what that might be myself. I think she called the police, which ended up kind of provoking a small scandal. Like the incident was reported in the Parisian newspapers the next day. And in order to kind of lay low and to prevent his own brother's name from kind of being dragged in the mud, Vincent decided to voluntarily commit himself to a mental institution in the south of France shortly thereafter. He lived there for about 13 months. That's where he painted many of his most famous works, including Starry Night, which he painted in about 30 hours. It's the view from his window in the institution. While he was there, he painted at an extraordinary rate, on an average of about one canvas a day, which suggests that he was, besides suffering from some sort of psychotic disorder like schizophrenia, almost certainly bipolar. Like that is a degree of manic enterprise that would be very difficult to sustain in the ordinary person, right? But many of his most famous and enduring works were painted in a mental institution. In fact, it's called Starry Night, and Starry Night appears in the book several times if you read carefully. And you see the painting through a different character's eyes every time. And each person sees something very, very different. And each person sees, on some level, a reflection of their own personality, a reflection of their own judgments and prejudices, which is also something that I wanted to show by telling this story from multiple perspectives, that the same thing can mean radically different things to different people. Eventually, though, Van Gogh decides to release himself, probably under the assumption that he couldn't keep doing this and he didn't want to die in a mental institution. So he decides to go to the north of France, to this town called Auvers-sur-Oise. My French pronunciation is not very good, but I think that's how you would say it. It's a small artists' commune about an hour and a half outside of Paris by train. So it was kind of like a hippie village in 1890, where there were a lot of like artists living kind of pseudo-intellectual lives in this village. This is where he meets the doctor, Paul Gachet, who I hope to show is probably one of those pseudo-intellectuals. Gachet was a very interesting person because he was a therapist to several famous artists at the time. Like he knew Paul Cézanne, he knew Monet. In some cases, he treated them. So he became kind of like a celebrity artist therapist. And he lived in this commune outside of Paris. When Vincent relocated there, his brother wrote a letter of introduction to Paul, and they struck up an acquaintance. He wasn't officially Vincent's doctor, though he did kind of treat him informally. He was really big into homeopathy. So on some level, he thought that most mental illnesses could be cured kind of with a lot of the sanguine stuff that you hear on podcasts. Like if you just get enough sunlight and good exercise and you get in touch with, you touch grass, basically. That was his model for treating people in 1890, which was radically different from how mental illness was treated in the 19th century, which was often addressed with something verging on a kind of torture or cruelty. Like in many mental institutions in Paris at the time, it was not uncommon to wrap the insane in sheets and then hose them down with cold water and then leave them out in the courtyard overnight, shivering and freezing. There was, of course, electroshock therapies that started to come into vogue in the late 19th century as well. A great deal of the movements to improve hospitals and mental institutions occurred in the 19th century as kind of a humanitarian effort to increase awareness about the dignity of human life, which is very interesting because we've kind of come full circle. So from these almost dungeon-like atmospheres where the insane were treated for hundreds of years, there was a great reformation in the 19th century to kind of make these modern hospitals that were based on scientific methods, and everybody was safe and power was not abused by these folks who really couldn't defend themselves in any particular way. And they made significant progress to the point where the modern mental institution in the 20th century was clean, was safe, was founded on empirically scientific methods. But then there was a push in the civil rights in the 60s and 70s in this country, the United States, that said that those mental institutions were actually infringements on these folks' civil liberties. And there was a radical push to deinstitutionalize the country. And so government on the state and federal level was removed from these mental institutions over the course of like 10 years. Almost all of them were defunded. Like fewer than 10% of them exist today than they did 50 years ago. And where do these people go? These are folks these are not folks with just, they're a little sad or they're a little anxious. These are folks who with debilitating mental illness and cognitive deficits to the point where they probably will never, ever, ever be able to support themselves. They'll never be able to have a job. They'll never be able to have a real romantic relationship and have a family. But there was a civil rights movement that said that these folks shouldn't be conserved by the state, which meant that their liberties would be taken from them. And so they closed down the institutions en masse, and now these people are just on the streets. Now these people are in the homeless camps in California. Now these people are cycling through prisons and ERs and things like that. So I don't really think that we've improved their situation. I think there's a longstanding belief that if people just get a chance and they have enough support, because everybody's more or less like everybody else, that they can make a go of it. And unfortunately, that's just not true. In any given society, in any given society, think about like, just from a cognitive perspective, there's going to be 1% of the population who has the lowest IQ. You know what I'm saying? And the lowest IQ would be, I don't know, 40, 50. I mean, to think that anybody should be able to support themselves and conservatorship is stealing away people's freedoms and liberties. I mean, I think that's actually very cruel. I don't think that that's a form of care and a form of help for a lot of folks. All right. So where was I? I was talking about, oh yeah. So Vincent relocates to this village over, and he meets Paul Gachet, who's this pseudo-intellectual, this physician who treats artists of the time, and he's something of a painter himself. So he fancies himself an artist just like those famous artists that he treats. And so he takes a very strong liking to Vincent, whose talent he can recognize. But they have kind of a strange relationship. And there is some evidence that they had a falling out shortly before Vincent decided to kill himself, though we know that the doctor was present at Vincent's deathbed. So it wasn't so bad that they couldn't overcome it, but I think that something happened. And the book indicates what that something might have been. So he's a real person. And I included him to show also the way that medical treatment and psychiatric care has evolved over the last 150 years. A lot of the things that folks used to think were state of the science now seem laughably ridiculous. And I wanted to include that in the book as well. Show us the bad Orion. Dude, I'm pretty bad, like in general. I don't think I need to go out of my way to show you that I'm bad. Question, was Gachet's dream prophetic about Vincent? Yeah, so there is a section of the book in Gachet's chapter where he has a dream, and then he wakes up and Vincent has broken into his house. So there is this part of the book where the dream and reality begin to merge into one another, which I think is often what dreams do. Did I go to the exhibit in Japan? No, I haven't. There's like 3 Van Gogh exhibits running in Tokyo itself right now. I haven't been to any of them, but I do hope and intend to reach out to those who run these exhibits around the world to see if they might be interested in carrying the book, as it might be something that is interesting to fans of the artist. Let's see, 1,000 yen. Hey, Orion, checked out Leon LaHava's Starry Night, beautiful rendition, respect from Japan. No, I haven't, but I can check that out soon. One of my favorite finds in writing this book, which was suggested to me by my friend Joseph, was Don McLean's song, Vincent, which is a beautiful song about Vincent van Gogh. I was very pleased to listen to that song because I think it echoed many of the sentiments that I independently came up with in the book. Is there a meaning behind the choice of the cover art? Yes, there is indeed. There is a meaning. So this cover is the actual verso, which means the back of a Van Gogh painting. It's not the back of Starry Night. Starry Night is oriented like this, so it really wouldn't work. It's the back of, I think, a painting called Two Cypresses. And I think it's beautiful. The kind of worn wood, the decaying labels, the faded canvas. I think in and of itself, it is attractive and interesting to look at. But I wanted the back if you go on Amazon, you search for books about Starry Night, every single book has the painting on the cover, which kind of makes sense. But this book is not about the art. Like, the art is what happens after he died, where he became famous, where he became an idea, where he became this international phenomenon. This is behind the scenes. This is an expose into the life that created those paintings. This is the part that nobody looks at. Today, everybody wants to look at the pretty pictures. This book is about the less attractive backstage to the creation of that enduring beauty. It's also a book about an end. It's about a death. So the fact that it's the back of a painting, the end of a painting, I thought was appropriate as well. If you look on the back of the book, you can see these are portraits done by Van Gogh of the various main characters. This is Vincent himself wearing the bandage after he cut off his ear. This is the doctor, Paul Gachet. I think this painting, Vincent van Gogh's portrait of Gachet, recently sold for like $80 million. I think it might have been one of the most valuable paintings at auction in history. This is a portrait that historians now can't decide whether it's actually Vincent or his brother Theo. So if you look it up online, it's like there's a question mark. They don't know if it's Vincent or Theo. And I put it there because it's the closest thing that we got to a depiction of what might be Theo. Cool. Well, thank you for your questions. If you've read the book, I'm going to do a reading in a few minutes. If you've read the book, I'm asking you directly, please write a review on the platform on which you bought it, which is probably either Audible or Amazon. The reviews help so much. I don't have an advertising budget. I don't have a publishing house or a publicist. I don't have a marketing team. Reviews engage the algorithm, which inform these platforms to put this book in front of people like you, people who might also benefit from reading this book. I'm counting on you because you're also, my fans and my audience. And if I can't count on you guys, I don't know who I can count on. There's been some interesting reviews so far. Most of them have been very positive, but some of them have been fairly perplexing. Like, there's one that was put on Amazon a few days ago, gave me 1 star from someone who purported to be my fan, because this person insisted that the book was too good to be written by a human. They insisted that this must have been an AI-generated book, and I couldn't fool them. And because I was a duplicitous, he or she could only give me 1 star. Which is a pretty incredible backhanded compliment, that the book was thought was too good to be written by a human being. But come on, man. I mean, it's like, this is a 1-star review is really messing with my ability to get this to people who might benefit from reading it. And I can tell you that no AI was used in the production of this book. I'm too intellectually proud to use AI to write or to steal ideas from other people. Like, there's no way I would want that. So it's either going to be on my own merits or nothing at all. So please, if you've read the book, leave a review. If you haven't, then get the book, read it. You can listen to it in 3 hours. You can read it in a single setting, and then leave a review. I would highly, highly appreciate it. Thank you for taking the time to do that. Okay, so to close out the discussion, if I don't have any more questions, let's say, oh, here's a question. Orion, last question. Mine about when you would want to meet Vincent, at which point in his life? Huh. I don't know. I guess I would want to have met him maybe when he was in that mental institution in the south of France where he painted Starry Night and was painting a canvas a day, I learned something interesting from a fan who reached out to me when she learned I was writing a book on Van Gogh. Apparently, Van Gogh was receiving a medication for his schizophrenia at the time. And one of the side effects of this medication is that it made certain cones in the retina very sensitive. And it made the cones that received yellow and gold colors very sensitive, which is why in the final years of his life, Van Gogh's paintings take on this like almost supernatural brilliance, especially with respect to yellows and golds. Like there's a lot of gold in wheat fields. In Starry Night, the stars themselves are bursting with yellow in the sky. I thought that was really interesting. Van Gogh painted for about 10 years, but almost all of the paintings that we know came from the last 2, maybe 3 years of his life, probably 2. If you look at his early stuff, you probably would never recognize it as Van Gogh. It has a very different style. So I thought that was fascinating that part of his medical treatment might be responsible for his brilliant tonality in his final paintings. It's so beautiful he found light during his darkness. On some level, that's the only time we can really see it. Like the darker it is, the brighter light appears. And I've thought about that a lot in the sense that all the darkness in the world cannot extinguish the light. But it only takes one flame to extinguish the darkness. So there is asymmetry between light and dark that exists in nature. It's not a yin yang. It's not like they're just equally balanced. Light is more powerful than darkness, though sometimes we can forget that. And that's the deceit of the darkness. It makes you forget that the light does not exist. But the real hope and charity of light is that the darker it gets, the easier it is to see smaller and fainter forms of light. Think about seeing stars in the middle of a city. Maybe you see a couple, to seeing stars in a countryside. It's only when it gets very, very dark that the fainter stars can come into view. So that's one of the magnanimities of light. Okay, so as promised, I think I'll end with a reading from the book. I thought I would take it from the chapter from Gachet. Gachet's chapter is written as a series of clinical notes. Remember, he is a physician, so he talks about his daily experience in kind of clinical shorthand. And I'm going to read an entry from later on in the chapter. Previously, he had a really kind of awkward encounter with Vincent at his house, where he just sort of like shut down and then ran out with any kind of explanation. And he was used to seeing Vincent every day, and he hadn't seen him for about a week. And so he decides to do something about it. All right, so here we go. 7 July. As it had been a week since V's unceremonious departure, and having not received any communication from him to allay my concern, I made up my mind to call on him directly. I did so after breakfast. He welcomed me bashfully and cleared a rumpled mass of clothes from a chair for me to sit. The little room was dim and disordered, and empty bottles of absinthe lay strewn about the floor. Since he did not initially attend to me, instead moving about the apartment in a half-hearted attempt at tidying up, it took me a few minutes to realize he was drunk. When I finally prevailed on him to settle down, he perched on the edge of the bed and regarded me mournfully. His eyes were damp and clouded, like a silty stream. Though we sat so close to each other, our knees fairly touched, I had the distinct impression he was inwardly elsewhere, living through the kind of experience that is recalled more clearly the more one tries to forget. He spoke through the haze of a maudlin nostalgia, reminiscing about our friendship as if it were a thing long past. Though I maintained he did nothing, could do nothing, to sap the strength of our bond, his ears were deaf to my repeated entreaties. Indeed, they only fixed him more firmly in his conviction to the contrary. Despite my mounting discomfort, he repeatedly insisted that I was a good man with a good heart, that the world was better for my being in it, and many other commendations to similar effect. As a mound is heaped high with the contents of a corresponding pit, he seemed to sink lower and lower as his praise piled up, until finally, having reached the nadir of his self-abasement, he abandoned his unhappy task and succumbed to the full force of his feelings. He wept brutally, viciously, his chest heaving like the pitiless swells that beat upon the storm-addled coast. Through gasping breaths, he recited his failings, real and imagined. He was unworthy, unlovable. He was a failure, a fraud, a broken human being, subsisting on the pity of others, a miserable fool only good for terrifying women, a useless idiot whose best was not good enough, an incurable lunatic incapable of the simplest tasks, a wicked deceiver, and a degenerate besides, a drunk. He insisted he did not deserve to exist. With each new invective, his voice rose in volume and pitch until, approaching the limits of his register, his speech collapsed into breathless incoherence. I sat by helplessly. Like weathering a cloudburst in some unexpected place, there is little to be done in such moments but wait. Searching for shelter, I cast my eyes about the room and noticed a small painting propped against the wainscoting. A village lay beneath a swirling, spangled sky. The little outpost looked exposed and defenseless under the massive heavens, which seemed prepared to draw the town, brick and stone and steeple, into its devouring maelstrom. A cypress tree had already begun its rapturous ascent. What would remain of the nameless establishment? And who would remember it once existed in futile defiance of that all-consuming nature? Looking back at V, I was filled with melancholy. This mewling man, this dismal room, this torrid scene, charged with urgent passion begging for release. What did it amount to? We moved through time like a knife across the water, our trackless path effaced no sooner than it's made. Yet who would trade this little life for the boundless deep? And so we cling to sodden straws like shipwrecked sailors and pray they'll raft us but a minute more. We are not built to float, and our eyes look ever upward as we sink. Thank you. So, thank you so much for joining me today. I hope that you got something out of this live stream, and I hope to do a few more in the coming weeks. Please check out the book if you haven't already. The links are in the description. You can find it on Amazon and on Audible in ebook, audiobook, and paperback formats. Please, please, please leave a review when you're done and help spread the word. Thank you for all your help, and I will talk to you soon. Bye-bye.